Hello everybody, my name's Steve, I'm the British Railroader, and welcome to the Model Railway Room for something ever so slightly different than the norm. So today I'm going to talk, just as the title says, about the concept of proto-freelancing. Now you may be wondering what that is, and it's a term that we probably don't use here in the UK, but my American friends will be probably quite familiar with it. And to explain it, I'm going to explain the difference between prototype modeling, proto-freelancing, and freelancing. They're three quite different things that sometimes actually overlap, but they're quite distinct in their, the way people approach them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through each of them, give you a few examples of layouts that are built this particular way. So we're starting with prototype modeling, and prototype modeling is probably the easiest one to understand because it is modeling a place or a time as accurately as you want to model it. There are lots of modelers that do this. I noticed that with my friends in the USA, there's a lot of people that want to build as accurate as possible replicas of places that they grew up or places they knew when they were younger. Now, a good example of this is my friend Andy Blanco. Now, Andy has what can only be described as a bit of a basement empire at his home just outside Pittsburgh. And his layout depicts his memories of the railroads around Pittsburgh in the 1980s. Now, as you can see from the photos here that Andy kindly sent me, he's trying as best as possible to replicate the kind of things that you would have seen in and around Pittsburgh at that time, a lot of which are still around today. Now, he's doing this as accurately as he can, but obviously some buildings have had to be compressed. Some buildings he's taken structures that are ready to build kits and just adapted them slightly. So they're not exact replicas, but they are close enough. Now, I can't wait until next year because I'm going to go and visit Andy and I'm going to get to see the layouts in person. And you can, of course, visit their website, the address of which I've put below. But what Andy and his son Charlie and their friends are trying to do is make it so that people can walk in and they can look at it. And if they know the Pittsburgh area, they can say, oh, that's such and such, and that's such and such. And that's prototype modeling. Another proponent of this is Lance Mindheim. Now, you know I've spoken about Lance's work quite a lot. I have most of his books. And Lance builds layouts professionally for a living, as well as doing his own. And his own layouts are inspired by real places. So what he builds aren't necessarily exact replicas, but they're near enough. Again, he uses selected compression. He may take a siding out just so that everything fits a bit nicer or move a building ever so slightly. But again, a lot of people say that when they see Lance's layouts, if they've been to the place that Lance is modeling, they recognize it immediately. So that, again, is a really good example of prototype modeling. Lance has got a great YouTube channel where he's showing some really good stuff about operations. Links to that will be in the description, but obviously if you want to see some of Lance's work, have a look at his websites below. Okay, so now we're moving on to proto-freelancing. So proto-freelancing is something that's going to be very familiar to those of us that model in the UK. We don't necessarily call it proto-freelancing, but I know a lot of us do it. And that's where we take a prototype railway and then we model it in an imaginary setting. So I think for us Brits, we've grown up with British Rail or the big four railway companies before the war, or the private companies that look after railways in each individual area. So we're used to having something that's already set out there. And what we've tended to do is we've tended to make models based on those railway companies or those settings, but put them in fictional places. Now, I've done this quite a lot. So one of my previous layouts was called Morford Park. Now, Morford Park is somewhere in the East End of London. It's set in the late 80s, early 90s in the Network Southeast era. And it was a way for me to be able to have a Network Southeast layout that kind of reminded me of where I grew up, because I grew up in Eastern London. But I wasn't able to model exactly the trains that were running because they're just not available in model form. And to be fair, my kit building skills aren't that good. So I was able to recreate it slightly differently and make this fictional place that, could potentially exist, possibly somewhere in the East End of London. I've also done a couple of other layouts based on Morford as a location in East London. One of them set in the 1960s, and this was built around a London Underground rail yard. And then a third one, which actually I took to exhibitions, which I called East Morford Docks, which was built around this very tiny company with, a few sidings. It was really a shunting puzzle, but it was quite effective. Now, when I started building Brooklyn Park, I took on this whole concept of proto-freelancing. So Brooklyn Park is based on part of the New York and Atlantic Railroad. There is a line that runs from Fresh Pond in Queens down to Bay Ridge in Brooklyn that the New York and Atlantic uses. They go to the car ferry and pick up, take freight there and pick up cars to take onto the main line. And what I did with Brooklyn Park is I imagined that somewhere along this line, along the Bay Ridge branch, there was this yard. And this yard, which had various industries that freight cars would be brought into and switched, and stuff would be taken out. So this doesn't exist. But what I've tried to do is actually make it not as realistic as possible, but to actually try and capture that flavour of the part of New York it's in. So what I quite like is the fact that I get comments from people saying that really looks like a bit of Brooklyn. And that's what I'm trying to achieve. It's not a real place, but it's based somewhere on a real railway. Now we do, as I said, we do this a lot here in the UK. We take real railways and we'll say, right, in 1863, the whatever railway decided to build a station here, and this is my interpretation of it. And it's got elements of that station, and that town. So that people look at it and say, oh yes, that's somewhere up in the Midlands, that's very recognisable, but it's not an actual place. And that's what I've done here. And there are lots of examples of proto-freelancing, I think in all types of modelling, no matter what country you go to, because it means that you can model what you want in your way, but still have it recognisable. Lastly, we're going to look at freelance modeling. Now, freelance modeling kind of is a wide spectrum. This is where you create your own railway. Something that's not particularly done with modelers in the UK, maybe more so in narrow gauge rather than in the standard gauges. But it's something that's very popular in the USA, and you will find that there are lots of modelers that do this. Now, I pointed out to people a little while ago that I got a book, which is Alan McClellan's Virginia and Ohio. Now, this is a fictional railroad. But what Alan did was he made it a very realistic fictional railroad so that you could actually imagine that this railroad could have existed. And if you go onto the Around the Layout podcast, which, as you know, I'm a great fan of, you will find loads of interviews with people that have freelanced railroads. There was one guy who was talking, and one of the bits that he put out was so realistic that people actually contacted him to see if there were any jobs going on the real railroad. It was, he'd built such a backstory for it. Now, freelancing can take, you can either be a freelancer who is almost a proto-freelancer, where you build a fictional railroad, but in a realistic setting using proper railway rules. Now, this has been done by Tim Garland. He has a YouTube channel called the Seaboard Central, which I will reference in the description so that you can get a link to it. He's got this whole layout with this whole backstory, really, really interesting, and it shows you what can be done with a freelancing. Some people do whatever they want, and that's one of the joys of our hobby, is the fact that there is what everybody calls rule number one. It's your railway, you run it your way, and you can have a completely fictional railroad or railway and you can run it how you want, as prototypically or as unprototypically as you like. Okay, so that's it for this video. I really hope that what I've described to you has helped you understand the difference between prototype modeling, proto-freelancing, and freelancing. There are lots of blurred edges. There are some people who model prototypes, but there's a little bit more license in it, so they're veering over into proto-freelancing. And again, at the other end, between proto-freelancing and freelancing, you've got this blurred edge where actually some of the freelance railroads are operated and built in such a way that they are so prototypical. It's just the name on the side of the engines that just doesn't exist. But that's the joy of our hobby. We can make of it whatever we want. So I really hope people have found this useful, especially those of you modelling over here in the UK who are thinking about getting into modelling American railroads. And hopefully you've got a little bit of a better understanding of the difference between prototype, proto-freelancing and freelancing. Anyway, if you've enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions, post them in the comments below. I'll be more than happy to answer them. And if you haven't done so already, please hit that subscribe button, click the little bell, press all, and you'll get notifications of all my videos. But that's it for today. My name's Steve. I'm the British Railroader. I'm saying goodbye from my model railway room. Bye-bye.